is the ultimate guide to measuring your body for crochet and knitting garments. Hello, if you don't know me, my name is Rajan, aka Not Half Bad Crochet, and if you enjoy crochet content like vlogs, day in the lives, tutorials, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Obviously, if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please do give it a little like and leave me a comment. So I've been crocheting pretty much mostly garments for a good couple of years now, and I have made very many mistakes when it comes to sizing my garments. I have made them too big, I've made them too small, and everywhere in between. And along the way, I have learned quite a lot about getting sizing correct for crochet garments. I'm not saying I'm an expert, I still definitely get it wrong from time to time, but I am able to use the skills and the knowledge that I have learned to be able to counter it a lot easier than before I knew all of this, basically. So hopefully you'll be able to find this an easy guide to learning how to get the correct fit for your crochet garments or your knit garments. And I wanted to kind of like pass along my knowledge because I feel like there are so many variables when it comes to getting the right fit for your crochet garments. So the way I've kind of like organized my thoughts is I split everything up into different categories, kind of starting from like the first point and then working your way down to physically holding a measuring tape and, you know, taking your physical measurements. I'm a plus size crocheter and I design crochet patterns specifically for plus size bodies, and I really want this to be helpful for people, particularly if you are plus size, because I feel like there are so many patterns out there that aren't designed with plus size bodies in mind. So if you are looking for some plus size patterns, you can find all of mine linked in the description, including this one, which is the Wave Hello top. It's one of my favorite patterns. It's a really cute faux halter neck, summery, wavy crop top. So my first tip is to get familiar with your own body. I feel like particularly with the societal body standards at the moment, it can be quite difficult to really kind of like look intently at your body. So this exercise is not to criticize your body. I literally just want you to look at your proportions, look at your body, and just kind of understand a little bit more about how your proportions are. I want you to sit or stand in front of a mirror and look at your torso if you're making like upper body garments like sweaters and cardigans and tops and stuff. Maybe look at your contours of your body. Personally, I have big boobs, I have a large lower stomach, so I know that those two areas of my body are the largest parts of my torso. I also have quite wide upper arms, I have relatively broad shoulders, and those are all things that I know because I have like stared intently at myself in the mirror. So I definitely think that getting more familiar with your body, the way your body contours, is a really good first step. Do you maybe have body parts that vastly differ in size, particularly if you are more straight sized? Do you have a considerably larger bust? Are your upper arms maybe a little bit smaller than the rest of your body? Is the length of your arms considerably longer? Do you have quite short arms? That sort of thing. And like I said, this is not an exercise for criticism. I purely want you to just understand the way your body forms and to also just see the beauty in it a little bit. I personally love the fact I've got big boobs. I love my wobbly arms. I love the fact I have broad shoulders, and I really want everyone to be able to see the beauty in their own body. My next piece of advice is to understand your yarn, and when I'm talking about your yarn, I mean the yarn fiber itself and the weight of it. So firstly, we want to know, what is your yarn made of? On your yarn you will have a yarn band, something that looks like this. It is the kind of paper or the wrapping that goes around your yarn ball, and on it will always tell you what the yarn fiber is and what weight it is as well. So for this yarn, this is 65% wool and 35% alpaca, and you need a 4mm hook for this specific yarn. So the reason why you want to know what your yarn is made of is because every fiber kind of behaves a little bit differently. So with animal fibers like this, they tend to have a little bit more stretch, a little bit more give, and then for natural fibers like cotton and bamboo and linen, they're often a little bit stiffer. So that is where it's very handy to know how your yarn is going to perform. Acrylic yarn can also be quite stretchy, so that's like another thing to consider when choosing your yarn and also choosing your yarn for specific projects. And if you're unsure about how your yarn fiber performs, there are so many amazing resources out there. There are loads of people on YouTube. You could simply just Google it as well. There are some really helpful Reddit threads, because I personally have not worked with like every single yarn fiber that there possibly is. I typically work with acrylic, different types of wool and cotton, so I'm more familiar with how those yarns behave. But anytime I kind of get a new fiber or a fiber fiber that's unfamiliar with me, I will literally just Google it, and Reddit or YouTube or somebody on the internet will be able to tell me how that yarn behaves, either when I'm actually crocheting or when I'm washing it or constructing the garment itself. So the next thing to consider is your yarn weight. Like I mentioned, this is a medium weight yarn, so it calls for a 4mm hook. There are lots of different names for yarn weights. You could get worsted weight or medium weight yarns, DK, which is also a medium weight, fine weight, lace weight yarns. You can get chunky and bulky yarns, and the reason why you kind of need to know what thickness or what weight your yarn is because that is going to inevitably affect the sizing of your finished garment. So if a yarn is super chunky, it's going to perform differently to a really thin yarn, particularly when you're working up the garment itself. And it's also going to affect the sizing because a thicker, chunkier yarn is maybe not going to have as much drape compared to a thinner or finer weight yarn. Throughout this whole process, there is going to be like a lot of trial and error, so you kind of have to be okay with making mistakes and essentially learning from them. But hopefully with this guide, it will just kind of give you a little bit more of a jumping off point. This leads me on to my next piece of advice, which is blocking. Are you going to be blocking your finished piece? Not everyone blocks their finished crochet pieces, which is personal preference. It depends on what yarn fiber you're using, it depends on personal preference, it depends on the sizing of the actual garment you've made. But you genuinely just need to know, are you going to be blocking it or not? You kind of need to know how your piece is going to behave when it gets wet, whether you're washing it in the washing machine or you are going to be hand washing it and blocking it. Fibers like superwash merino wool, they stretch out quite a lot when they're wet. They're also not typically designed for the washing machine because they can felt very easily with a lot of agitation. So you kind of need to adjust the sizing of the piece that you're actually crocheting to know whether you're going to block it or not. So for pieces where I am using a animal fiber like wool or alpaca, I will typically size down a little bit, maybe make things a little bit shorter, maybe make things a little bit more fitted, because I know that if I block it, it will kind of stretch out a little bit and give a nice drape and then get bigger in size. If you're unsure how your chosen yarn fiber performs when it's wet or when it's blocked, you can simply just Google it. Again, there are so many amazing resources out there to kind of figure out how certain yarn behaves. Like I said, I have not used every yarn fiber in the entire world. When I used this was the first time I'd ever dealt with alpaca yarn, and I didn't know how alpaca yarn behaved, so I simply Googled it. I found a really helpful Reddit thread that said that alpaca blocks really nicely. There's plenty of stretch and plenty of give to it. So when I was making a alpaca based garment, I sized down. I made everything a little bit smaller, I made my sleeves a little bit shorter, I made the garment itself shorter, and then when I blocked it, it stretched out really nicely and it had a really lovely drape and it just fit me a lot more comfortably. My next piece of advice would be to know what stitches you're going to do. So each stitch that you will do when it comes to crochet performs slightly differently. Whether you're doing kind of more basic stitches like single crochet, half double crochet, double crochet, or maybe you're doing something a little bit more complex which has like a combination, maybe some chains or whatever the stitch is, they will all behave ever so slightly differently. Some stitches shrink up, some stitches stretch. It is really going to be dependent on all of the things I've mentioned already, which is the yarn fiber, the weight, and the stitch itself. There are some stitches that are going to be really tight, particularly if they are short stitches, so anything that involves a lot of single crochets themselves. There are some stitches like double or treble crochets which are obviously a lot taller, which are going to be a little bit looser, a little bit airier, and a little bit more meshy once you have wet them, blocked them, or actually worn them. So that's why it's kind of important to know firstly how your yarn behaves, whether it's the fiber or the weight itself, and then how it behaves in your chosen stitch. Which again leads me nicely onto my next point, which is to make a gauge swatch. And I know I'm hearing the boos already, okay, but I personally don't make a gauge swatch in like the traditional sense, but I do like to do a little swatch of my chosen stitch in my chosen fiber, just purely so I can see how it behaves. And it doesn't need to be a big swatch, it can be like 10 stitches by 10 rows. It doesn't need to be a lot, but I personally like doing that because then not only do I know what the stitch pattern looks like in my actual yarn, but also I know how it behaves. I can figure out if it's shrinking, I can figure out if it's expanded or if it's stretched out. I can also see how physically stretchy it is, if I am maybe going to be blocking it, not blocking it. And I do think that doing a gauge swatch or a sample swatch of some kind is very helpful before you kind of do your whole measurement and do this whole long old chain and then realize halfway through that maybe it's not performing the same way that you thought it would. There are lots and lots of resources online, particularly on YouTube, that show you how to do the maths and the calculations. So if you are wanting to do a proper gauge swatch where you measure the actual swatch, you block it, you measure it afterwards sort of thing, there are loads of really helpful guides and tutorials out there to be able to help you figure out what maths to do. Personally, I have dyscalculia. I hate doing maths, I hate counting, but those resources are very helpful, particularly if you're using a fibre that's maybe a little bit more on the pricier side. You don't want to waste it. Maybe you're on a time crunch and you want to make sure you get the sizing right, or maybe you're making a garment for somebody else and you want to ensure that you get the sizing correct for them. So my next tip would be to understand garment construction. And I'm not saying you need to be like an expert in garment construction, you don't need to be a sewer or anything like that, but mainly just look at your own clothes. I personally found that looking at my own personal stash of knitwear that I had before I started crocheting, I was able to kind of see how these panels were worked up. Maybe it was all fashioned in one piece, maybe you could kind of see the seams of where panels were being joined, maybe you could see that there was like shaping around the armholes, there was shaping around the neckline, and it kind of made me understand how garments are constructed and how those fits then are translated onto my own body. Not only do you want to be looking at the seam lines of your actual garments, but you also want to be looking at the composition of the materials. If you have a material that is maybe like cashmere or wool, or maybe it's acrylic or polyester or something like that, that composition of the materials is also going to affect how the garment is constructed and then how that construction is going to feel on your body and fit on your body. My next piece of advice is to double check everything. And if you're not going to do a gauge swatch, that is totally fine, but you particularly need to be double checking everything, especially if you've not made a gauge swatch, because making a gauge swatch is very helpful. It kind of obviously gives you a little bit more of the maths of whether you've got your sizing correct. But if you're not doing gauge swatch, if you're not doing a sample swatch, which I would recommend to do because it kind of helps along the way, but if you're not going to be doing that, you do need to be double checking your measurements pretty much along every step of the way. And this is like a surefire way to catch any mistakes early on. There is quite literally nothing worse than maybe doing like a whole sleeve and then realizing you've made it too small, or doing a whole panel for your body and realizing it's not big enough. So double check your measurements, particularly after you have maybe done a few rows of your stitch. Maybe it's across your bust, across your stomach. I personally always struggle with this with my sleeves. I always feel like my sleeves end up tighter, and I am really bad for double checking my sleeves. But I think because by the time I've come to my sleeves, I just can't be bothered. But double check everything, don't be like me. And double checking your measurements if you're not going to be doing a gauge swatch or a sample swatch is generally just like the bare minimum. I know sometimes it's easy to like get locked in on the sofa, or maybe get locked into a project and you can't be bothered to like get up and measure it or double check it, but please do double check your measurements along every measurement that you are taking. So every panel that you've started, even along the way, just make sure that you're doing the right sizing. Okay, so now you are equipped with all of that information. You've done your Googling, you know how your fibre is going to behave, you know what stitch you're using, you know how your stitch is going to behave, you've decided if you're going to be blocking your finished piece. Now is on to actually measuring your body for your chosen garment. So you firstly want to decide on your chosen fit. For me personally, all of my crochet patterns are made to measure, and they're all pretty adjustable in terms of what kind of fit you want. You can make them cropped, you can make them long, you can make them oversized, you can make them more fitted. It is honestly just personal preference. For me personally, with this top for example, I know I wanted one to be a little bit more fitted. My other wave hello top that I've made is a little bit looser, it's a little bit longer, but this one I wanted to be a little bit more on the fitted side. I also knew that I would be blocking it, so I accounted for any extra wiggle room of blocking when I was doing my sizing. I would really recommend measuring in centimeters rather than inches, just because you can get a lot more accuracy, and it's also a little bit easier to translate centimeter measurements onto your actual body. So in a lot of patterns you will probably notice something called positive ease, which is basically your slack. So when you're taking your measurements, if you are wrapping your tape measure around your torso or your bust, you obviously are taking your actual measurements, but the positive ease is essentially those extra few centimeters or inches that are added to the actual sizing of the garment, just to make sure that the fit is not skin tight. If you want a skin tight finish, then you probably don't need any positive ease, but if you want it to be a bit looser, you want it to be baggier, then you do need to add on some positive ease, which is basically adding on a few centimeters or inches onto your final measurement. And again, this is all down to personal preference. This is all down to to the fit that you want, and again down to the yarn, the stitch and your chosen fibre. So for me personally, I do have big boobs, I have a large lower stomach, so when it comes to doing a front panel for anything, I typically go by like the largest measurement. If I'm making something that's not cropped, I will go for my lower stomach. If I'm doing something that's cropped, I will take my measurement for my bust. So with a lot of patterns, you will essentially duplicate the stitch count for the front panel and the back panel, but for me personally, because I do have a disproportionately larger front part of my body, like my boobs or my stomach, I typically will reduce the sizing of my back panel by maybe like a few centimeters, maybe a couple of inches, just to kind of ensure that it's not falling too loosely, depending on obviously what chosen fit I've gone for. If you are going to be doing the same thing, the main thing you want to remember is that where you are joining your panels, probably at the shoulder seam, you just want to make sure your shoulder seam is the exact same, so that when you are joining your front panel to your back panel, there is that exact measurement that you can attach both of your panels to. This is going to give you a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more freedom when it comes to the sizing, and also just a little bit more accuracy when it comes to kind of catering the piece for your own body. And that is pretty much it. This is all of my advice for measuring your body on how to get crochet and knit garments to fit your body as desired. And like I said, it is a lot of trial and error, but hopefully by doing these things and having this extra knowledge and just going to do a little bit more research in your yarn, your stitches, doing sample swatches, doing gauge swatches, it will just kind of get you to be a bit better equipped when it comes to getting the right fit for your body. But like I said, I am not an expert on this. I very often, still to this day, make mistakes when it comes to my sizing. I am personally a doer. I learn from my own mistakes. I learn from doing. When I started crocheting, I made several very badly sized garments for myself, but I think now I've learned all of these things. I have become a lot more accustomed to my own body, and it just gives me a little bit more insight as to the fit of my garments and how I want them to fit on my body. So yeah, I hope you found this guide helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and hopefully I'll be able to help. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a little like and leave me a comment to let me know what you think. And of course, if you're not subscribed already, please do subscribe to my channel if you enjoy crochet content like vlogs, tutorials and day in the lives. Thanks so much for checking out this video, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.